Welcome aboard Calypso. Here we are in French Polynesia and we're changing the impeller on a Mercury 4-horse outboard. It's the long shaft one, and that comes with its own peculiar set of problems, as you may imagine. And the first thing we do is take the crankcase oil out completely. Remove all the oil from the crankcase, the engine oil, the sump oil, and drain the tank of petrol. Get all the petrol and liquids out, then you can put it on your head. Otherwise, you're going to have all kinds of problems with particularly with the crankcase oil running into the engine and into the carburetor. It's essential that you do that. Then you can put something nice and soft down on the ground so you don't damage the cowling, and flip it over. You should have no drips and that, so it's environmentally a good idea as well. Now, the long shaft is particularly problematic. You may see down here in this corner this little piece of metal sticking out. That is a guide, as you can see from up there. That is a guide for the gear change mechanism, and it also works as a little preventer for when you're in reverse. You can't actually, and going backwards, the motor won't flip up. This flips in and locks down, so the motor won't flip up. It's long, it's spindly. The long shaft makes it even worse, and it's all got to align. So here we have, we've popped off the little inspection cap that Mercury are very nice to provide. So you can see here the gear linkage. The gear linkage is designed to come up into that window when it's in neutral. So make sure you're in neutral before you loosen it. Another thing to do before you loosen it is get a cable tie underneath it. All Mercury engineers, like everyone else in these days, are in a secret club to stop you being able to maintain your outboard and make sure it's really frustrating and difficult without a load of special tools. And so the way around that is to get this cable tie, stick it underneath that gear linkage before you loosen it. Now you'll need a 10mm socket to loosen it, which I have standing right here. It seems to have just quickly disappeared. There it is. You'll need a 10mm socket to loosen it. I've already cracked it off. Oh no, I didn't. I thought I had. But there you go. You'll need a 10mm to loosen. Make sure the cable tie is nice and tight. Don't take it out all the way. Just loosen it off like that, so it's flopping around in there. Then there are two nuts here and here, two bolts, sorry, here and here with washers, which you'll have to take off. Now, assuming you're in neutral, and this will make life very much easier for you when you're reassembling, if you know where you are. You don't need to drain the gearbox oil. That's all a nice discrete compartment. So assuming we're in neutral and we're ready to go, you're ready to lift off the bottom of the leg. It might take, I did this earlier, but it might take just a little tap round with a soft mallet, not a hard one, to loosen it off, and voila, here she comes, like this. Okay, this is your leg now. Everything in here has got nothing to do with the impeller. This is your leg. Inside here is the impeller, and this is what we'll be doing next. But firstly, I want to show you something you will need to check when you take the leg off. Now, can you see inside there? There is a bearing of some sort, a cutlass bearing. Well, I took it out earlier, and the little washer on top, which is here, broke and was corroded, and so I'll need to get a new one at some point. I'll have to order a new one or make something up. At the moment, I've just I've just shimmed it up and pressed it in, because we're in Nukuhiva and there isn't a Mercury shop for about 3,000 miles in any direction. So I've made a little temporary repair in there, but you check that, because these do corrode, these bloody things, really, really quickly. I don't know why they don't make them out of a composite or something. It's all part of the plan to make you spend money on spares, I imagine. Anyway, you will need to check that. This is the housing for the impeller. These are 4 bolts that I took out earlier. You don't have to do anything here. This is the water intake. It will just pop right out. So you lift off your impeller housing like this. Now, when you do this, more than likely the Allen key that holds the impeller, stops the impeller spinning on the shaft, or the Woodruff key, sorry, it's going to fall out. Ours has fallen out. There it is. Without that, you are screwed. So try and keep that separate. Put that somewhere safe, like lying next to your hammer. And this is your housing will now come off, and your impeller will come off. Now, there's nothing really that wrong with this impeller. but we do have a rule on this boat that when we get a spare part, we fit it. And the reason is, you only find out you've got the wrong spare part by doing that. And you don't find out in the middle of the ocean when you need it. So it's a general rule. Here we have been given the wrong spare part, so this is the proof that that proves the theory. It is really good to fit any spare part you get. You've got a new alternator, put it on, take the old one off and use it as a spare. Don't use the untested one as a spare. The idea of if it ain't broke, don't fix it is absolutely rubbish on a boat. You've got to try and find out if it's broken. You've got to do destructive testing. You've got to find out what's going to break before you go anywhere. And here's a good example of that. So you can see we've been given the wrong impeller, but we'll carry on with the process as if this was a new one. Now this one's going to be no problem to fit in the housing because it's already bent over. But as you can see, when you get them, they're pretty flat. So in order to help them in, you can sometimes wrap a cable tie around them so that you can squish all the bits down to help them go in. Sometimes that helps, but it's not going to be necessary on this one. Now, this little pin is a terribly important and fiddly thing. You'll find on the shaft there is a flat point. There it is, it's slightly flat, and that pin has to rest up against there, and the little groove in the impeller has to line up with it. Right, what I've done here is I've been fiddling around with it, and I found a method that works. Take a glob of sheep grease here, lanolin, made from sheep, and I put a blob against the flat part of the shaft to hold it in place. And now you just remember, I've got the where the groove is, and this particular impeller lines up with that blade. You just bring it down onto the shaft there, and you find it's got a bit of play in it, but it can't go much further than a tenth of a turn in either direction. So now to get the housing on, drop the housing over, line it up with here with the water pump. Your impeller is just sitting there, and then turn a little bit of pressure, just a little bit, and turn the shaft. I'm turning the shaft by hand. If you're still in gear, you can turn the propeller. But if you're in neutral, just turn the shaft by hand, don't get any pliers on it, and the housing will drop down as the blades find their position. Right, so we've put the cover back on with using the 4 bolts here. Tighten them in a cross pattern to make sure it's a nice seal on the aluminium. Don't tighten them up too much because they're in steel going into aluminium, and we all know what that means, you know. So keep the torque down, and that's okay. Now comes the bit that you're going to actually go mad doing, which has been designed by the Nazis at Mercury to be the most difficult thing. It's the Rubik's Cube. You've got this here metal which has to go through the guiding bit that we had the clip on before. That's the gear changer. It's then got to poke out of a tiny hole here to operate the safety gizmo that stops your engine flipping up when you go backwards. You've got to get this main shaft through the cutlass bearing and into the splines there, at the same time as lining up this water tube, which takes the water from the impeller up and circulates it around the engine. So it's a real bitch. Now you can make life a bit easier. I'm going to give you a tip here. We've already given you a tip here. Hold that and make sure you're in neutral. Make sure this is in neutral. If you started in neutral, it'd be a lot easier. Now turn the thing upside down and send it through the cutlass bearing. This may have been easy when everything was nice and perfectly straight in the workshop, but in the real world things get bent and they get twisted. So now we've got to try and get this lined up through the gear changer again. Can you see through there? This is a fantastically difficult thing to do on your own, but you just have to fiddle with it until you can get it through. Now if you come only to this far when you've got it through the gear changer, it means that you've gone through with the main shaft through the cutlass bearing, but you've gone down this side of actually the hole for the engine, and it can often just go this far. Now I've got it in the right place now, and you can tell it's in the right place because the screws will drop down past your field of vision. So now you can you know you're in the right place. You can wiggle it about a bit without causing too much damage. But now the difficult thing now is to try and get the gear change through the piece of metal through here, then to pop out at the bottom here on this tiny hole which you can't see, which I showed you earlier. This is a real pain in the arse. Now ideally Mercury should give you a little another little inspection window there to wiggle it through, but you are expected to do it from up here. So it's a bit of a pain, but it can be done. It can be done. I would take, if I were you, a flat screwdriver, a fairly decent sized one, lift this so you can move it and try and push it all the way to the back. That tends to work for me. Yours will be different, you'll just have to do trial and error. There goes mine, and it's popped out of here nicely. Right, the next thing you need to do is to retighten the linkage with a 10mm socket and get rid of that cable tie. Now if you're still in neutral, as you should have been all the way through, that'll be fine. This is designed to be in line and tightenable when you're in neutral. Right, now with that linkage in place, test it with the gear changer that it's going in and out of gear. And once you've done that, well, if it doesn't go in and out of gear, you've just got to mess around with the gear change linkage until you've got it set so it will go in forward, neutral and reverse easily. When you've done that, all you have to do is pop these two in there and Bob's your uncle. You're in business again. You turn it up the right way. Don't forget to fill it back with oil again and petrol, and check the oil, and check it again after you've run it, because the oil tends to get around the engine and then it's lower than you think it is. So fill it up with oil again, run it a minute, and then check the oil again. Hopefully you'll have water spurting out of there happily, or in my case at least you'll know that the impeller you've been given is the wrong one and you can correct it before you head off to somewhere even more remote than we are. Right, that's it. Before going, I just want to point out this sacrificial zinc here. Mercury, the Mercury store in Mexico wanted $30 each for those, and I bought a scrap piece of zinc from the boatyard for $1 and made 25 of them and just drilled a hole in. You don't need the one from Quicksilver, it's a complete rip-off. And that's another tip for the day. Alright then, good luck with your own. Give us an email if you've got any questions.